I stood in Trent Baxter's glass office, holding my father's obituary with trembling hands. The newspaper clipping felt heavier than it should have, like it contained all the grief I'd been trying to hold together since the phone call 3 days ago. "I just need 3 days, Trent," I said, my voice steady despite everything crumbling inside me. "The funeral is on Friday, and I need time to help my mom with arrangements." Trent didn't look up from his computer screen. He kept typing, the sound of his keyboard filling the uncomfortable silence between us. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see my colleagues pretending to work while obviously listening to every word. "We're short-staffed this week," he said finally, still not meeting my eyes. "The Henderson project is due Monday, and you're the lead. If you leave now, don't bother coming back." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd worked for this company for 6 years, missed family dinners, worked weekends, stayed late without complaint. I'd built the Henderson project from the ground up, and now he was threatening my job if I attended my own father's funeral. I set the obituary down on his desk, right next to his expensive coffee mug. "You'll regret saying that." I walked out, leaving my ID badge on his desk beside the newspaper clipping. "My name is Ella Monroe. Before I tell you how it all started, I have to ask you for a favor. Write in the comments where you're watching me from and don't forget to like and subscribe. Your help is very important. What I'm about to share with you is something I never thought could happen at my work. This is a story about trust, betrayal, and the kind of evil that hides behind a smile. That was the day I learned my boss valued project deadlines more than my father's funeral. I sat on a park bench outside the corporate building where I'd spent the last 6 years of my life, trying to process what had just happened. The autumn air was cold against my face, but I barely noticed. My phone kept buzzing with messages from concerned colleagues who'd witnessed the confrontation through Trent's glass walls. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped build half the systems that kept that company running. I'd trained new employees, solved impossible problems, and worked overtime without complaint. But when I needed basic human compassion, when I needed 3 days to bury the man who raised me, I was told to choose between my job and my grief. Please subscribe, because sometimes karma just needs a little storytelling to help. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an official email from HR, confirming that my leave request had been denied in writing. The funeral was held in a small gray church on the outskirts of town, the same place where my parents had been married 35 years ago. I sat in the front pew next to my mother, watching friends and family file past my father's casket to pay their respects. The folded HR email on my phone felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. Every few minutes, I'd feel the weight of it there, a reminder that somewhere across town, Trent was probably telling people I'd abandoned my responsibilities. "Did your work let you come?" my mother asked quietly during a break between speakers. The question was so simple, so reasonable, that it broke something inside me. "No, Mom," I said, taking her hand. "I let myself come." She squeezed my fingers, understanding everything I couldn't say about choosing between duty to the living and respect for the dead. My phone rang during the eulogy. Trent's number flashed on the screen, probably calling to ask about project files or client updates. I declined the call and turned off my phone completely. Some things were more important than being available 24 hours a day. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what mattered most. I returned to the office the following Tuesday, a week after the confrontation in Trent's office. I'd spent the weekend helping my mother sort through my father's belongings and thinking about what I wanted my life to look like moving forward. Trent was waiting by my desk when I arrived, that smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I see you decided to come back after all," he said loudly enough for the entire department to hear. "No," I replied calmly, opening my laptop and logging in for the last time. "I came to return company property." He laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Don't be dramatic, Ella. We both know you need this job." Around us, my colleagues had stopped pretending to work and were openly watching the exchange. I could see Noah Green at his desk, his expression worried. Melissa Crane from HR was hovering near the coffee machine, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of this conversation. "Actually, I don't need this job," I said, my fingers moving across the keyboard. "And neither does anyone else who wants to work for people who treat them like human beings." I hit send on an email I'd been composing, then closed my laptop and unplugged it from the docking station. "What did you just do?" Trent demanded. "Sent a goodbye message to the team," I said, packing my laptop into its bag. "Thank you for making this decision so easy." Within 5 minutes of my leaving the building, my phone started buzzing with responses to the email I'd sent to the entire department. The subject line had been simple: "To my incredible team." The message thanked everyone for their hard work over the years, encouraged them to know their worth and demand to be treated with respect, and included my personal email address for anyone who wanted to stay in touch. I'd been careful not to say anything that could be construed as corporate sabotage or poaching. I'd simply reminded my colleagues that talented people deserved to work in environments where their humanity was respected. The first response came from Noah: "Wherever you go next, count me in." Then Paula Reyes from our biggest client: "I heard what happened. This is not the kind of company we want to partner with." Then Maria from accounting: "I've been updating my resume all morning." By lunchtime, I had 17 responses from colleagues expressing support, outrage at Trent's behavior, and interest in whatever I decided to do next. I sat in my apartment, reading through the messages, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Maybe losing this job wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning. The coffee shop across from our old office building was crowded with the usual lunch rush, but I'd managed to find a corner table where Noah, Maria, and 2 other colleagues could meet without being overheard. "I can't believe he actually said that," Maria said, stirring sugar into her latte. "I mean, we all knew Trent was heartless, but refusing funeral leave? That's a new low even for him." "The whole department is talking about it," added James from the IT team. "Half the people are updating their LinkedIn profiles." Noah leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We've all been miserable there for months. The overtime, the unrealistic deadlines, the way he talks to people. Ella, you just did what the rest of us have been afraid to do." "Which is what, exactly?" I asked. "Stand up for yourself. Show some backbone." I thought about that for a moment, sipping my coffee and watching the conversations happening around us. Normal people having normal conversations about their lives, their families, their hopes for the future. "You know what?" I said finally. "We could do this better ourselves. All of it. The client relationships, the project management, the actual work. We have the skills and the experience." Noah's eyes lit up. "Are you talking about starting our own company?" I stirred my coffee slowly, the idea taking shape in my mind. "Maybe I am." I spent the next 3 days building a business plan on my kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks, printouts, and my laptop screen glowing late into the night. The numbers were challenging but not impossible. I had some savings, enough to cover startup costs and basic operating expenses for a few months. The services we could offer were clear: project management, client relations, strategic consulting. All the things we'd been doing for Trent's company, but without the toxic management and impossible demands. "Dad, this one's for you," I whispered to his photo on my bookshelf as I finalized the budget projections at 2 in the morning. He'd always encouraged me to take risks, to bet on myself when I believed in something. Starting a consulting firm to compete with my former employer definitely qualified as a risk. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I heard what happened with your boss. Can we talk?" Paula Reyes. Paula was the senior client representative at Henderson Industries, our biggest account. She'd been working with our team for 3 years and had specifically requested me as the project lead on multiple contracts. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'd love to talk. When works for you?" Her response came immediately, "Tomorrow lunch? I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Paula met me at a quiet restaurant downtown, away from the business district where we might run into former colleagues. She was a sharp woman in her early 50s who'd built her career by recognizing talent and backing the right people. "I've been working with Henderson Industries for 15 years, she said over soup and sandwiches. "In all that time, I've never seen a manager treat an employee the way Trent treated you." "Thank you for saying that." I was starting to wonder if I was overreacting. "You weren't. And frankly, his behavior has been affecting our working relationship too. The missed deadlines, the poor communication, the constant staff turnover in your department." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm switching vendors next quarter," she said. "Henderson Industries is ending our contract with your old company. The question is, if you had your own team, your own firm, would you be interested in bidding for our business?" My pulse quickened. Henderson Industries represented about 40% of my former department's revenue. Losing them would be a devastating blow to Trent's operation. "I'd be very interested," I said carefully. "But I'm still in the early planning stages." "How early?" "I haven't even filed the paperwork yet." Paula smiled. "Then you better get started. I can hold off the vendor search for 6 weeks, but after that, I'll need to make a decision." I texted Noah as soon as I left the restaurant, "How fast can we form an LLC?" The resignation started quietly. Noah submitted his 2 weeks' notice on a Wednesday morning, citing personal career development opportunities. He didn't mention my name or the consulting firm we were planning, but everyone in the department knew what was happening. Maria followed on Thursday, then James on Friday. By the following week, whispers were traveling through the office about mass resignations and people clearing out their desks. The atmosphere was tense, with Trent clearly aware that something was happening but unable to prove any coordinated effort. I came by on Tuesday to collect some personal items I'd left behind, using my temporary visitor's pass to access the building. Trent intercepted me near my old desk. "Something going on I should know about?" he asked, his voice friendly but his eyes cold. I smiled politely. "Not for you, no. Ella, if you think you can poach my staff." "I think talented people deserve to work for managers who treat them with basic human decency," I interrupted. "If that's poaching, then maybe you should examine your management style." He started to respond, but I was already walking toward the elevator, my box of personal belongings balanced under one arm. The next morning, Noah called me from his car in the office parking lot. "I just handed in my resignation," he said. Trent's face was priceless. By Thursday, panic had set in at my former company. Through friends who still worked there, I heard that Trent was pacing his office, making frantic phone calls to HR and upper management about employee retention and corporate espionage. "He's telling everyone that you're forming your own team," Noah reported during one of our planning meetings. "He's calling it theft of intellectual property." "You can't steal knowledge and experience," I replied. "And you definitely can't steal people who choose to leave voluntarily." Melissa Crane from HR had actually called me personally to ask about the resignations. "I have to ask," she'd said, sounding genuinely concerned. "Are you encouraging people to quit?" "I'm encouraging people to make their own decisions about their careers," I'd answered honestly. "If they're choosing to leave, maybe you should ask why." "Ella, between you and me, Trent is claiming you're trying to sabotage the department." "Melissa, also between you and me, Trent sabotaged himself when he chose his project deadlines over basic human compassion." She'd been quiet for a moment before responding. "I can't argue with that assessment." The same day that conversation happened, Trent slammed his office door so hard that the glass walls shook. Everyone in the department heard him shouting at someone on the phone about corporate loyalty and ungrateful employees. His desperation was becoming obvious to everyone. Word travels fast in our industry, and within 2 weeks, I'd heard through mutual connections that Trent was actively trying to damage my professional reputation. He was telling clients and vendors that I was emotionally unstable and claiming I'd stolen proprietary information when I left. The accusations were both false and potentially damaging to the consulting firm I was trying to build. I smiled quietly when I heard about his campaign against me, then called the business attorney my father had recommended years ago. "Do I have grounds for a defamation case?" I asked during our consultation. "Possibly, but let's start with something simpler," the lawyer suggested. "A cease and desist letter often stops this kind of behavior without the expense of litigation." The letter was professionally worded but firm. Trent was to stop making false statements about my character and competence, or face legal consequences for defamation and interference with business relationships. I had the letter hand-delivered to his office on a Monday morning. According to Noah, who still had friends in the department, Trent turned white when he read it. "You can't steal what you created yourself," I told Noah when he called with the update. And it was true. Everything I'd built at that company, the client relationships, the project management systems, the team dynamics, had come from my own skills and effort. I was simply taking those skills somewhere they'd be valued. Paula was true to her word. 6 weeks after our lunch meeting, she signed a letter of intent with North Point Consulting, the name I'd chosen for my new firm. The contract was substantial. A 1-year engagement worth $200,000, with options for extension based on performance. I signed the paperwork in my temporary office, a shared workspace across town with second-hand furniture and a coffee maker that only worked half the time. But when I put my signature on that contract, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of building something entirely my own. "We just became competition," I told Noah as we celebrated with takeout Chinese food and cheap champagne. The news reached Trent within hours. According to Maria, who'd maintained friendships with people still working at our old company, he'd received an official notification from Henderson Industries that they were ending their contract and moving to a new vendor. The loss of Henderson Industries represented nearly 40% of his department's revenue. More importantly, it was a public vote of no confidence in his leadership. How did he take the news? I asked Maria during our check-in call. About as well as you'd expect. There was yelling. Something got thrown. Melissa from HR had to have a conversation with him about professional behavior. Justice, it seemed, had excellent timing. The phone call came on a Wednesday evening while I was reviewing project timelines for our Henderson Industries contract. "You'll regret this," Trent's voice was tight with anger. "You're nothing without the infrastructure and resources I provided." "That's interesting," I replied calmly, not bothering to look up from my laptop. "Because half of your former team disagrees with that assessment." "I'm talking about a lawsuit. Corporate espionage. Theft of trade secrets. Trent, I'd be very careful about making legal threats you can't back up." My attorney would love to add harassment to the defamation case we're already building. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "This isn't over, Ella." "You're right," I said. "It's not over. It's just beginning." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer to document the threatening phone call. The next morning, I heard through Noah that 2 more employees had submitted their resignations. People were clearly losing confidence in Trent's ability to lead the department effectively. The dominoes were falling faster than I'd expected. By Friday, nearly half of Trent's original team had either left the company or submitted notice. The department that had once been known for its stability and expertise was hemorrhaging talent. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at my office from Trent's company attorney. Inside was a formal legal notice accusing me of systematic poaching of staff and interference with business relationships. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who responded with what he called a masterclass in legal precision. His response included documentation that all resignations had been voluntary, that no confidential information had been shared, and that employees had every legal right to choose their own career paths. He also pointed out that a pattern of resignations might indicate management problems rather than external interference. Most devastatingly, he included copies of the original HR email denying my funeral leave, along with witness statements from colleagues who'd heard Trent's ultimatum. The letter concluded by suggesting that any further legal action might result in a countersuit for defamation, wrongful denial of bereavement leave, and creating a hostile work environment. Trent's lawyer apparently advised him to drop the matter entirely. Meanwhile, Melissa Crane from HR had started forwarding me copies of internal email threads, including one panic-filled message from Trent to upper management about unprecedented staff turnover and external sabotage. "Thought you might find this interesting," she wrote in her forwarding note. Even HR was losing confidence in his leadership. The call from Paula came on a Thursday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. "I have good news and bad news," she said. "The good news is that Henderson Industries is so pleased with your work that we want to extend the contract and increase the scope. The bad news is that we've decided to cut all ties with your former company." What happened? They missed 2 deadlines this month. Their project manager was openly rude to our staff, and frankly, the quality of their work has declined dramatically since you left. I wasn't surprised. Trent had been relying on his team's expertise without understanding the systems and relationships that made everything work. Without experienced staff to handle the complex details, his department was failing to meet basic standards. "We're terminating their contract effective immediately," Paula continued. "The work will be transferred to Northpoint Consulting." The contract was worth 6 figures annually. For my small firm, it was transformational. For Trent's department, it was catastrophic. "They told us they wanted to work with people who cared about humanity as much as profitability," Paula added. "I thought you'd appreciate that feedback." I did appreciate it. I also appreciated the irony that Trent's cruelty during my father's death had ultimately cost him his most valuable client relationship. That afternoon, I signed the expanded contract in my new office. A real office now, with proper furniture and a coffee machine that actually worked. The interview request came from Regional Business Journal, a publication that covered local corporate news and business developments. "We're interested in doing a feature story about your company," the reporter explained. Local entrepreneur launches successful consulting firm after workplace conflict. The David and Goliath angle is compelling. I agreed to the interview, keeping my responses professional and factual. I talked about the importance of work-life balance, treating employees with respect, and building businesses based on genuine expertise rather than fear-based management. The article ran the following week with the headline, "Former Employee Builds Rival Firm After Workplace Injustice, Wins Major Contracts." The story was fair and well-researched, including quotes from Paula about our work quality and from former colleagues about the toxic environment at my old company. Most importantly, it presented the situation accurately, not as a vindictive employee trying to damage her former employer, but as a talented professional who'd chosen to build something better. Trent saw the article on LinkedIn within hours of publication. According to Melissa, who'd become an unofficial inside source, his face went completely white when he read it. That same day, his CEO requested an emergency meeting to discuss the department's declining performance and public image problems. The boardroom meeting was apparently brutal. Through Melissa's network of contacts, I heard that Trent had tried to spin the situation as bad luck and external sabotage, but the numbers told a different story. Revenue down 40%. Staff turnover at 70%. 2 major clients lost in 6 months. Multiple complaints about unprofessional behavior. "She's just lucky," Trent had reportedly said about my success. "Anyone can look good with 1 contract." The CEO's response had been swift and decisive, "She took half your team and our biggest clients." That's not luck, Trent. That's leadership. Trent was placed on immediate performance review, with 60 days to demonstrate improvement in all key metrics. Revenue, staff retention, client satisfaction, and professional conduct. Everyone in the industry knew what performance review meant for a manager with failing numbers. It was corporate language for, "Start updating your resume." Meanwhile, Northpoint Consulting was thriving. We'd hired 4 new employees, moved to a larger office, and signed 3 additional clients. Noah had become my official business partner, and we were already discussing expansion plans for the following year. "Your dad would be proud," he said one evening as we reviewed our growth projections. "I think he would be too," I replied, looking at the framed photo on my desk. 6 months after starting Northpoint Consulting, our team had doubled in size and we'd outgrown our shared workspace. We signed a lease on our own office suite downtown, complete with a conference room, proper IT infrastructure, and space for continued growth. Noah organized a small celebration for our first day in the new space, bringing bagels and coffee for everyone. "This is just the beginning," he said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. To Ella, who turned the worst day of her professional life into the best opportunity any of us could have asked for. The team applauded, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. But the real validation came that afternoon, when my phone rang with a call I'd been expecting but dreading. "Is this Ella Monroe?" The voice was unfamiliar but professional. "Yes, this is Ella. My name is Alex Porter. I'm the senior client manager at Morrison Industries. We've been working with your former company for the past 2 years, but frankly, we're not happy with the service level since their management changes." Morrison Industries was Trent's last remaining major client, his final lifeline in a department that was quickly collapsing. "We'd like to discuss transitioning our account to Northpoint Consulting," Alex continued. "Would you be available to meet next week?" I scheduled the meeting for Tuesday, then sat back in my new office chair and smiled. The Morrison Industries proposal took 3 weeks to prepare. I wanted it to be flawless, not just because the contract was valuable, but because I knew this was likely Trent's final chance to prove his department could retain clients. Our proposal outlined a comprehensive strategy for modernizing their project management systems, improving communication protocols, and delivering measurable results within the first 90 days. It was exactly the kind of work my team excelled at. More importantly, it was exactly the kind of detailed, strategic thinking that Trent's depleted department could no longer provide. "We're not stealing this client," I told Noah as we reviewed the final draft. "We're earning them." We submitted the proposal on a Friday, the same day that Trent's team missed their monthly report deadline for Morrison Industries. The irony was almost too perfect. By Monday, Alex had called to schedule a follow-up meeting. By Wednesday, we had a signed contract worth $150,000. Trent's last major client was gone. According to Melissa, the news reached Trent's office at exactly 3:47 p.m. on Thursday. She knew the time because that's when the shouting started, loud enough to be heard through the glass walls of his office. The CEO called an emergency meeting for Friday morning. This time, there would be no performance improvement plan, no second chances, no gradual transition. Trent Baxter was fired in a closed-door meeting that lasted exactly 12 minutes. The department collapse was swift and complete. Within 2 weeks of Trent's termination, the remaining staff had been reassigned to other divisions or offered voluntary buyouts. The space where I'd worked for 6 years was gutted and converted to additional conference rooms for other departments. It was as if the team that had once produced millions of dollars in revenue had never existed at all. Melissa sent me updates throughout the process, partly out of friendship but mostly because she was as disgusted by Trent's behavior as everyone else had been. "Staff turnover hit 70% before they finally pulled the plug," she wrote in one email. "The exit interviews were brutal. Everyone cited management issues and hostile work environment." The CEO had apparently conducted a full investigation into the department's decline, interviewing former employees and reviewing Trent's management decisions over the past year. The denial of my funeral leave had been specifically mentioned in the final report as an example of fundamentally inappropriate leadership behavior. "Justice served," Melissa concluded her update. But the real justice would come a week later, when my phone rang with an unexpected offer. "Ms. Monroe? This is Catherine Wells, VP of Operations. We'd like to discuss having Northpoint Consulting handle transition operations for our former project management department." Walking back into the building where I'd been humiliated 6 months earlier felt surreal. I rode the elevator to the same floor where I'd once been told to choose between my job and my father's funeral. The space looked different now. Where Trent's office had been, there was now a conference room. The open floor plan where my colleagues and I had worked was being converted to additional workspace for other departments. Catherine Wells met me in the lobby, a professional woman in her 50s who'd been brought in to oversee the department reorganization. "We need someone to manage client transitions and project handoffs," she explained as we walked through the space. "Everything needs to be completed professionally and efficiently." What happened to the existing management structure? Let's just say there were significant leadership issues that needed to be addressed. She showed me to what had been Trent's office, now empty except for a desk, chair, and boxes of files that needed to be sorted. "We'd like Northpoint to oversee this entire transition," Catherine said. "Full project management authority, direct reporting to my office, 6-month contract." I looked around the space where Trent had once told me not to let the door hit me on the way out. "I accept," I said. That afternoon, I sat in his former chair, signing paperwork that officially made my consulting firm responsible for cleaning up the mess he'd left behind. "You said I couldn't leave, Trent," I whispered to the empty office. "Turns out you're the one with nowhere left to go." 3 weeks into the transition project, I received an email from an address I recognized but hadn't seen in months, Trent's personal account. "Ella, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to reach out. You won. Congratulations. I'm not proud of how I handled things, especially with your father's situation. Maybe we could talk sometime, clear the air between us." I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the man who'd forced me to choose between my job and my grief. The man who'd tried to destroy my professional reputation when I chose to build something better. I started to type a response several times. "Some conversations aren't worth having. You made your choices, and I made mine. I hope you learned something from this experience." But in the end, I simply marked the message as read and deleted it. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. Some apologies came too late to matter. I had more important things to focus on than Trent's guilt or his need for closure. My business was thriving, my team was happy, and I was building something meaningful from the ashes of the worst professional experience of my life. That was response enough. A year after my father's death, I established the Monroe Fellowship, a scholarship program for employees who'd lost immediate family members and needed time to grieve without financial stress. The program provided temporary financial assistance and guaranteed job protection for workers who needed extended bereavement leave. "No one should have to choose between a paycheck and saying goodbye to someone they love," I said during the launch announcement. The speech was recorded and shared widely on social media, resonating with workers who'd faced similar impossible choices between professional obligations and personal loss. Several companies reached out about implementing similar programs, and 2 business schools asked to use our model as a case study in ethical management practices. The story was picked up by national business publications, with headlines like "The Manager Who Turned Grief into Power" and "How One Woman's Loss Became a Win for Worker Rights." But the real satisfaction came from the first fellowship recipient. A young father at one of our client companies who needed 2 weeks to care for his dying mother. "You don't understand what this means to my family," he told me when I called to inform him about the assistance. "Actually," I said, "thinking about my own father, I understand exactly what it means." The final scene took place in my corner office overlooking the city, 18 months after the day Trent had forced me to choose between my career and my father's funeral. I was reviewing quarterly reports that showed Northpoint Consulting had grown to 22 employees and secured over $2 million in contracts. We were profitable, expanding, and known throughout the industry for both excellent work and excellent treatment of our staff. Through my window, I could see the building where I'd once worked, where I'd once been told my grief was less important than project deadlines. My current team was in the break room, laughing over lunch and planning someone's birthday celebration. They worked hard, but they also knew they worked for people who valued their humanity as much as their productivity. On my desk sat a framed photo of my father from his last birthday, along with a handwritten note from my mother. "He would be so proud of what you've built, sweetheart." I picked up the photo and smiled at his familiar face. He taught me kindness, I said to myself, thinking about all the lessons he'd shared over the years. Trent taught me strength. Both lessons had been necessary. I turned to face the camera I'd set up for the video I was recording, feeling peaceful about the story I was ready to share. My name is Ella Monroe, I said, looking directly into the camera. 18 months ago, my boss told me I had to choose between keeping my job and attending my father's funeral. Today, I run the consulting firm that took over his department after it collapsed. I paused, thinking about everything that had happened since that terrible day in Trent's office. This story isn't about revenge, I continued. It's about what happens when you refuse to accept that cruelty is the price of employment. It's about building something better instead of just enduring something broken. Behind me, through the window, the city stretched out in afternoon sunlight. Somewhere in those buildings were other people facing impossible choices between their jobs and their humanity. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where your basic human dignity is being compromised for someone else's profit, I want you to know something: you have more power than you think. You have more options than they want you to believe. I smiled, thinking about the team in the next room, about the clients who trusted us with their most important projects, about the scholarship program that would help other families avoid the choice I'd been forced to make. Please subscribe, because sometimes karma doesn't need help. Sometimes karma just needs time and the courage of people who refuse to accept that things can't change. I turned off the camera and walked toward the sound of my team's laughter, carrying my father's photo with me. If you leave for that funeral, don't bother coming back. I stood there holding my dad's obituary while my boss smirked like my grief was an inconvenience. I walked out shaking, but what happened next? Even I didn't expect the entire department to follow me, and the fallout that came after still shocks me.